black smoke of little ships, where once hung the pall of a burning town. Dunkirk in 1950. Rusting iron and rotting hulks, sole relics of a great deliverance. Now, 10 years after, the little ships were back, and in Dunkirk, men stood and remembered. They stood at Dunkirk, and they stood too at St. Valery, for it was in such tiny places that all was lost, yet all was won. There men fought so that others might return, to Arromanches and Lyon-sur-Mer, to the meadows of Normandy. In 1950, the arenas of war were but quiet beaches, cliffs and fields, but fields in which white crosses made a permanent harvest. And in 1950, the Allies still patrolled Berlin, that shattered city of weedy ruins and broken dreams of conquest. There, the victors watched over the vanquished, and there they watched each other. In Berlin, too, men remembered and paid homage to sacrifices made in a common cause. Yet here, the ex-Allies were separated, not just by frontier lines, but by vast differences of political creed. Though in Berlin they stood side by side, close enough to touch, yet they were divided by a broad and slowly widening gulf. Once along the flat roads of northern France rolled the steel tracks of the German panzers. And at their coming, the people gazed in wonderment and awe. Now, 10 years after, they stood again to marvel at the new machines of peace. The world's largest mechanical press, rolling from the foundries of Chicago, Illinois, to the foundries of Douai, France, to rebuild the old world with the power of the new. In Washington, after 2 years of the Marshall Plan, the man who gave it its name reported on its progress, George C. Marshall.
It is true that Western Europe, to get its economic house in such order that it can survive and prosper in this competitive modern world, requires a tremendous final effort over the next 2 years. But looking again at the conditions prevalent in the spring of 1947, I can only feel that one near miracle has been accomplished. We must work for and expect another miracle.
To the peoples of Europe living close to the grim problems of recovery, the near miracle of the past 2 years was not so apparent. And yet, in their cities, there were marked signs of steady progress. Rationing was fast disappearing, and with it, the black market. More food was on display than for many a long year. Textiles and clothing, though still expensive, were nevertheless abundant. But when things go right, few ask questions. To the people of Western Europe, the means of recovery was so familiar as to exist almost unnoticed. To habitual travelers on the airlines of Europe, an accustomed figure was America's Paul Hoffman, responsible to Congress for the smooth working of the European Recovery Program. Now, almost as familiar to Parisians as their Place de la Concorde, were the headquarters of OEEC, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. Here, the representatives of 18 nations met to decide where and how American aid could best be applied to restore and consolidate Europe's productive capacity. In the vast workshop of Europe, production figures were climbing. Output was greater than at any time since before the war. Steadily, the dollar gaps were closing. Yet still, the continent could not produce enough to pay for the food and raw materials vital to its existence and prosperity. For 18 nations, Marshall aid dollars continued to fill the gap, enabling Holland to import 3/4 of the cotton she needed to keep Dutch textile looms at full capacity, bringing to Britain her entire import of carbon black, necessary for the production of rubber for her industries and transport, providing France with the sulfur she needed to make fertilizers to protect her millions of acres of vineyards. Through Marshall aid came tractors and farming equipment for Turkey to turn a primitive agricultural system into a prime food producer for the whole continent. With American dollars came American steel for the merchant ships building in the shipyards of Trieste, high-grade feeds for the cattle on Danish farms, and out in the North Sea, special depth recording gear to help Danish fishermen locate the deep shoals of herring. 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, machinery from America was digging out the rich iron ore vital to Norway and all Western Europe. In 18 countries, American aid was playing an all-important part. But though the finance and materials for recovery came from abroad, much was due to the efforts of Western Europe's 270 million people. In the factories and workshops, men and women were fast learning that in the peace, just as in the war, output was vital to survival, that ultimate success was dependent upon their own efforts. So at their looms and benches they worked hard, spurred by the knowledge that this time they were making not tanks, bombers, and weapons of destruction, but clothes, cars, tractors, and machines with which to build. Outside on Europe's farmlands, land workers too kept up the pressure, realizing that their harvests were to feed not fighting armies, but hungry, needy peoples. So, in the docks of London, Antwerp, Havre, and Rotterdam, the noise of the busy cranes grew and swelled. In Europe, the healthy roar of new trade was an echo to the efforts of its people. Far from Europe's economic front, in the sawmills of Washington State, experts from 12 European countries studied at first hand American methods of paper and wood pulp production. For in the drive for recovery, the United States was not only a provider, but also an open house for technical knowledge and production know-how. In England, British building workers, fresh from a similar visit to the States, reported to fellow members of their trade American facts, figures, and methods. Passed to every building site, this knowledge could be put to good use in Britain's hard-pressed housing drive. In Turkey, from American technical advisors and specialists, farmers were learning to get the most from their soil at the least cost with the least effort. In London, American and British experts were working together in a new cooperative venture. Over the table, they discussed ways and means of developing the resources of the vast African continent, pooling ideas for tapping its potential wealth. Meanwhile, to salesmen of Britain's export drive, Americans passed on tips for breaking into that other great jungle, the huge commercial market of the United States.
The market is rugged. The market is competitive, but it is a huge market. And big as it is and vast as it is, none of us in sales management of America believe that we, even, have exploited it to the full.
But if the old world was learning, so indeed was the new. Touring the provinces of France were farmers from the Middle West, seeing Europe's agriculture for themselves. Here, Iowa, Texas, and Oklahoma learned that though France's plumbing might not be up to their standards, its livestock was unsurpassed. But one significant thing all American visitors to Europe could mark and point out to each other: the changing face of the continent. Fully aware that martial aid would end in 1952, each country was using currency saved by aid dollars to build for the future. Each year, huge sums were plowed back into Italy's vast land reclamation projects in the Po Valley, into France's great scheme for channeling the River Rhone for irrigation and the production of electric power, into steady modernization and electrification of thousands of miles of Europe's railways, to create the modern transport system vital to the productive continent of tomorrow. Yes, from Norway to the Mediterranean, Europe was building for the future. In Paris, speaking of the efforts of his fellow Europeans, Mr. Van Zeeland of Belgium said,
"We are celebrating today the end of the second year of the Marshall Plan. Those 2 years have not been lost, and yet we have no right to be satisfied with ourselves, because we know that so much remains to be done in the future. And we are convinced that unless we reach the goal, everything we have done so far will finally be lost."
Yes, in Europe, time was short. For though this was a continent of the war-weary, the homeless, and the needy, it was also the front line in the battle for democracy. Ever undermining the efforts for recovery were the unrest, bloodshed, and violence of political strife. That which the peoples of Europe were buying with their sweat, they might yet have to defend with their lives. In London, statesmen of the Atlantic Pact nations met to formulate policies of common defense, seeking peace in united strength. In his speech, America's Dean Acheson was forthright.
The nations of the Atlantic Council are accordingly resolved by their united efforts to build up a system of defense equipped with modern weapons and capable of withstanding any external threat directed against any of them. Throughout its deliberations, the Council has recognized that only through coordinated plans and effort could its great objectives be achieved. They are determined that freedom, which is the common basis of our institutions, shall be defended against every threat of aggression, direct or indirect.
Such was the state of Europe, that long-suffering continent that has given so much to the world. Once again, in its war-racked history, its peoples were rebuilding. After Hitler, as after Napoleon, Bismarck, and Kaiser Wilhelm. They read of Berlin and Korea, of wars and the rumors of wars. Yet in their resolve, they remained unshaken. To them, Europe was eternal. With patience and courage, they worked on, firm in their belief that whatever they were building, it was something for tomorrow.
This is the kind of place you've been assigned to. A quiet corner of France, old, peaceful. Until a couple of years ago, a place where nothing much had happened for a long, long time. But a couple of years ago, France joined America and the other free nations in a mutual defense program. So into this tranquil spot, we came. All kinds of guys, suddenly set down in the countryside of a strange nation. Guys from the cities and the sticks, with plenty of savvy and a big job to do. Including America, 14 nations have pooled their forces to make a protective screen between the East and the West. In Europe, we're part of this huge international army, and our job is to help keep that army's planes equipped, serviced, and in the air. "14 allied nations made the decisions that brought us here into a life that's designed more for speed than for comfort."
Go ahead, lead on, McDuck. Well, you don't have any of those, do you? You guys take them. Just feed him to them.
You think they got cold water out in the showers?
They usually have. I mean, I see no reason why they should change.
What do you think of France as a whole, anyway?
It sure is.
One thing's certain. No matter how anxious we may be to go back home, the communists are just as anxious to have us go. They're a noisy bunch, the communists, and having us in Europe makes them pretty sore. Having us here means the free world has called the communist bluff and is ready. The majority of people in France aren't communists. If they resent us, it's for the same reasons people in any little American town would resent having a big army base set up near them. The French would feel the same way about their own army. Most of their roads and streets weren't built for heavy traffic. The local cops never had such a load on their hands in all their quiet careers. The old and leisurely has had to give way sometimes to the fast and modern. To make room for a new parking lot, for example, a market was displaced and this woman had to move her stall. She isn't exactly happy about the change, but she understands why it happened.
Je pense que maintenant qu'on est place Voltaire, que c'est merveilleux, mais enfin, il faut bien durer.
By now, the French are fairly accustomed to seeing us around. By and large, they'd like to make us feel welcome. Some of them are glad to have our trade. We mean brisker business.
Vous serez content d'apporter un bon souvenir de France, surtout de Châteauroux. Oui. Merci bien.
And most Frenchmen are simply glad we're working with France, like the people of this small town and their mayor.
Having the American air base in our town is proof of America's sincerity in helping to defend Western Europe. Some Frenchmen, and in particular some of the good people in this part of France, are very slow to accept any change. They grumble a little, but that is just in their nature. They are glad to have your help in this common cause. And we certainly feel that we, the French, are playing our part in this effort.
Frenchmen are playing their part, all right. They've had a universal military training program for a long, long time, and they're building a powerful armed force, a force with a hard cadre of men with years of combat experience in Indochina. Like us, these men may soon be far from home, serving in the same big outfit, the same effort that sent us to France. They're modern elements of an old, old army, an army as rich in tradition as the country itself. Based in France, you've got a chance to learn something about these traditions and about the people who formed them. To learn anything about a new country, a little of the language helps. French is tough, but beautiful, worth learning.
Vous voulez que je vous parle de la ferme où ma mère et moi nous demeurons.
Ma chère Erin,
Vous voulez que je vous parle de la fin pour ma mère et moi nous demandons.
The problems French presents to adults don't seem to bother Army kids.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Dimanche, lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, samedi. Yes, I have one.
One. What's his name?
It's a she.
Oh, it's a she. Well, good for you. Do you speak in French or English when you play?
French.
You must know quite a bit of French by now.
But language is no barrier when it comes to sports. Playing a hard, fast game with a man is a good way to find out what kind of a guy he is. This is a set-to between a French team and the stars of one of our bases. But it's more than just a game. The two teams play together. The American scorekeeper works alongside the French scorekeeper. Two nations, two teams, acting together in harmony at play as they must act together in harmony at work. To build the base you've been assigned to took plenty of machinery and plenty of sweat. Some of the equipment and manpower was American. A lot of it was French. But none of it would have been any use at all without the extras, without willingness, cooperation, and common sense. Once in operation, a base has no chance to be effective unless there's a lot more of the same. Unless Americans and Frenchmen alike let no barriers stand between them. Working in partnerships like this. A sergeant named Stephen and a Frenchman named Raymond.
I have been working here for 6 months. We are hired and paid by the French mission here at Chateau. Most of us are skilled workers, and the average pay is about 170 francs an hour, about 65 cents of American money. It's not very much, but we hope to get some more soon. We have no complaint, and we like the work right here.
I'm very lucky to have Raymond here to work with since he speaks English. Some of the crews cannot speak to each other at all, but they always get the work done because they're doing the same type of work. They understand each other enough to get the job done.
To get the job done. That's the whole idea. That's why we've been assigned to France. That's why we've suddenly got French partners. And the job? To help keep the Allied nations protected by strength in the air. Strength maintained by you, Americans, working with Frenchmen, side by side.